So, hello everyone. I am Palak. I am a PhD student and working with Professor Ranjini Bandyopadhyay in Ramanujan Research Institute. So, first of all, I would like to thank the organizer for giving me this opportunity to present my work in APS meeting. So, the title of my talk is Pattern Selection in a Radial Displacements of a Confined Aging Viscoelastic Fluid. So basically today I'll be talking about the interfacial instabilities at the interface between a viscoelastic fluid and a Newtonian fluid. So this interface between two fluids is found to be unstable when a more viscous fluid is displaced by a less viscous one. And these displacements give rise to these interfacial instabilities, basically these intricate patterns. And this whole problem of interfacial instabilities is originated from petroleum industry, where tons of water in oil were absorbed during the oil recovery. So these kind of intricate patterns is everywhere. You see them a lot, and nature explores this pattern. So for example, the tree branches. So these tree branches grows in this way to get an optimized oxygen exposure for trees and light exposure for the tree leaves. In the mud cracks also, in the river network formation, and even in human lungs also. This is possibly like very fascinating to me. If imagine if the human lungs don't have these branched networks, and if it has a simple shape, say like a sheet, then the equivalent area, like the function which they are doing right now in having these branches, the equivalent area will be equal to roughly like 2 tennis courts. So imagine the importance of this branch network in our life. But let me tell you, the instabilities are always not required. Their suppression is also equally important. For example, for instance, like as I mentioned in the case of oil recovery, so the formation of these fingers of water in while displacing oil, trap the oil in between, and which affects the efficiency of the oil recovery. The other example could be like in the case of lithium rechargeable batteries. So the formation of lithium dendrites in that case affects their shelf life. So control of these instabilities is which is really important, and that's what we are doing in our lab. So we are controlling these interfacial instabilities by using viscoelastic materials. So the viscoelastic material which I'm going to talk today is an aqueous suspension of synthetic clay Laponite. So this is basically an inorganic molecule having this shape particles with the diameter of about 25 nanometers and a nanometer thickness. So this has basically have this octahedral sheets sandwiched between two tetrahedral sheets, and so these are like these shape particles, and it comes in the form of dry powder. So these are the stacks of these Laponite dish-shaped particles, and when you dispose these particles in water, so what happens? The sodium ion present in the intergallery space comes out in the bulk water due to the osmotic pressure gradient, and this renders a negative charge on the face of Laponite particles. On the other hand, the charge on the rim of Laponite particles depends on the pH of the medium in which you are disposing these particles. So this heterogeneous charge, like configuration of these dish-shaped particles, and all this process of like the sodium ion coming out, it's all happening with time. So these time-dependent electrostatic interactions between these charged particles give rise to the formation of some microstructures, and that's how like the suspension ages with time. So it becomes elastic with time because of the formation of microstructures between these particles. So here in the bottom left is a schematic showing house of card arrangement of this shaped particles. So this aging property of this Laponite suspension is what we have used in our studies, like how this aging mechanism can be incorporated to study the interfacial instabilities. So this one is the vial having Laponite suspension just after the preparation. So it's like liquid-like, right? You can see when we waited enough for sufficient time, like for 24 hours, and it transformed into a soft solid. So it entered into this kinetically arrested state, and oops, I don't know what's happening. Okay. Yeah, so it is actually entering into the kinetic arrested state. So when you tilt the bottle, so it is actually sustaining its own weight. So it's become a soft solid. All you just need to do is give the suspension its time, and it will transform. So since it's a viscoelastic material, so we have done the rheology also. Okay, yeah. So we've done the rheology. Here what you are seeing is a time test, and on the left hand y-axis you have this G prime and G double prime. So G prime is basically the storage modulus, which tells you about the viscoelastic solid property of the material. G double prime is the loss modulus, which tells the viscous property of the material. And on the x-axis is this aging time or waiting time. I'll be using aging time or waiting time interchangeably throughout my talk. So and the holo symbols are the G prime, G double prime, and the solid symbols are G prime. So as you can see at the low waiting time, the holo symbols like the G double prime is dominating over G prime. That means in this regime, the system is behaving like a viscoelastic liquid. If you're waiting enough, like with time, you see this G prime, the field symbol starts like G prime starts dominating over G double prime, indicating that the elasticity of the system is like building up, it's becoming elastic with time, and that's what is reflected over here. So as I said, like we have incorporated this aging mechanism in the interfacial instability study. So to do these studies, we have used a radial Hilleshow cell. So basically it comprises these two circular glass plates and they have a very infinitesimal gap between them. It's about like 170 microns. And on the top plate, you have this hole through which both the fluids are injected. So how we have incorporated the aging time? We first fill the cell with the Laponite suspension and then wait for a predetermined aging time TW. Then we inject the second fluid. So I want to mention here, we have done two different sets of experiments. So in the first set is the miscible displacements, where we have studied the displacement of Laponite suspension with water. And since it's an aqueous suspension and water is displacing it, that's why these are the miscible displacement experiments. And in the second case, we have studied the displacements with the mineral oil to see the effect of interfacial tension. So yeah, so let me show you like what will happen when the water displaces this Laponite suspension. So here you are on the screen, you are seeing three different sets of experiments having different aging time TW. So the background here is basically Laponite. It's a transparent suspension. So to add the contrast, okay. So at this dyed thing which is coming is basically water. And as you can see, when the Laponite is like low ages, okay, everything is playing by its own and it's ruining my suspense. Okay. So yeah, so at low ages, oh gosh. Okay, let it be. So let me just directly go to the next slide where the patterns are there, or let them play in the back. I'll explain. Okay, so at low ages, when the suspension is liquid-like, so you see these dense viscous patterns like where the merging of fingers are happening. Okay, I'm touching it like I guess multiple times. Okay. Yeah. Maybe I'll just control it from here. Okay, so at low ages, you can see like these dense viscous patterns where the fingers are there, and it's not a very well-defined interfacial boundaries you can see at that time. But when we like increase the aging time, like so at 3 hours, so there we have actually observed this well-defined interfacial boundaries, and this kind of side shredding is also occurred in that time regime. And when we waited enough for a day, so 24 hours, then the suspension is so elastic, water actually not displacing it, actually like fractures the outer field like Laponite suspension. So it's so elastic, so that we have observed this viscoelastic fractures in that case. So these are the, okay, this is, I'm so sorry, yeah. Okay, so these are the fully developed patterns at the different aging time you can see. So at low ages, we have this dense viscous pattern, and as we have increased the aging time of the Laponite suspension, we actually got the viscoelastic fractures with the dendritic pattern at the intermediate waiting time. So just by like a fixed concentration of Laponite and like just by playing around with this aging property, we have observed this different range of interfacial patterns, like the interfacial pattern morphology. Now let's see like what will happen when we incorporated the interfacial tension. So the displacements of Laponite suspension with mineral oil. So all the experimental conditions are same. Like so here we can see like the interfacial tension has this stabilizing effects, right? So this dark central region you are seeing over here is because like at the initial time it was like a circular interface, and at the later stages these flower petals like structures start developing. So we call them flower patterns. And at high ages, when the Laponite suspension is sufficiently elastic, we have observed these jag patterns. The jaggedness you can see at the interfacial profiles. So by just playing around with the interfacial tension and the aging property, we have observed this wide range of interfacial pattern morphologies. But this is not the end of the story. So, oops, okay. Yeah, let me just drop this. Yeah. So next thing which we have done is we have changed the displacement rate, like with which we are displacing the Laponite suspension. And so for this, we have chosen a 24-hour aged Laponite suspension because it's so elastic. And we have seen the same sequence, like we can see like there is a transition from viscoelastic fractures to dendritic pattern. And in the case of immiscible displacements, there was a transition from jag pattern to flower pattern. So basically TW, varying TW is something like TW is inversely proportional to Q. This kind of behavior which we have observed in these two parameters. I'll just quickly tell you about the quantification. So we have done some image analysis to quantify these patterns. And so what we have calculated is the areal ratio, which is the ratio of area of pattern to the smaller circle enclosing the entire pattern. And when we plotted the areal ratio with the waiting time, so we have seen like the black squares are basically for the miscible displacements and the red circles are for immiscible displacements. So as expected, like the immiscible displacements have a larger areal ratio as compared to the miscible one. And as the transition from DVP to VEF, we have observed there's a decrease in the areal ratio. And the other parameters we have also calculated, but due to the time constraint, I'll just quickly tell you. So we have calculated the average branch frequencies, like the number of branches in an like region of interest of 1.5 centimeter, the torus of like width 1.5 centimeter, and also the average branch width. And as we have seen, like in the case of DVP to VEF, so on the top right, you can see the branch frequency, the square symbols, the brown squares. The branch frequency is decreasing with the transition from DVP to VEF. Though their widths, as they were appeared, they are not changing very much. But the width of immiscible displacements, like the bottom one, are always like greater than their miscible counterparts. That's what we have observed, right? Like the immiscible displacements have the thicker protrusions as compared to their miscible counterparts. So similar analysis have been done for the varying flow rate experiments also, and the similar trends have been observed in those in this case of experiments. But as I said, like we want to control these instabilities, right? So there should be complete suppression. So let me tell you, by choosing the appropriate amount of appropriate aging time and the flow rate, we have observed a complete suppression of instabilities. So on the screen, what you are seeing is basically mineral oil, dyed mineral oil displacing Laponite of age 1 hour with the flow rate of 50 ml per minute. And we have observed this suppression of instabilities. So as we have seen, like these two parameters, like areal ratio and the branch frequency F and the width. So both are like kind of tells you about the similar things. Then when we plotted this ratio versus product of F and W, so independent of the experiment, like the black symbols are for the miscible displacements and the red are for the immiscible displacements. So they are like kind of varying approximately linearly. What we wanted to do, so we wanted to segregate these, like distinguish these different patterns. And let me tell you, just this areal ratio itself like is capable of segregating all this distinct morphology. So on the right hand side, what you are seeing is a three-dimensional phase diagram spanned over the three control parameters which we have played around. Like the flow rate, the waiting time, and of course the interfacial tension. So the different colors are basically the different morphologies which we have observed, and this is mapped on the natural logarithms of this areal ratio. So to summarize, basically by using the shear and the time dependent rheology of these soft glassy suspensions, one can actually go on the pattern morphology. And this is the first time this aging time has been used in these studies, and this can be used as a reliable parameter in determining the pattern morphology in the case of interfacial instabilities. And definitely like the natural logarithms of areal ratio can identify each pattern morphology. Okay, this is changing by its own. I don't know. Okay, so I will take just few seconds to acknowledge few people over here. So definitely my my supervisor, Professor Ranjini, for her guidance and encouraging discussions. Oh God. Yeah, okay. And of course, my lab mates and the workshop people for the help with the experimental setup. And this work is done in collaboration with Vaibhav and Devashish. Vaibhav is sitting over there, and Devashish is doing his postdoc in Dusseldorf right now. Thank you guys, and I'm really sorry for that thing just happened. Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah.
So how do you, do you know a quantitative way to distinguish the regime change from viscous to elastic from the patterns? Not qualitatively, but quantitatively, because viscous fingering has viscosity, but if you talk about a fracture, you use surface energy. So if you go into the Griffith's fracture criterion, then you talk about creating two fresh surfaces and the energy required to do that, which will go into your G plus, not
G prime and all that.
So have you thought of a quantitative way to discriminate between?
No, actually, we are thinking to do the, like, since we have the rheology data, like from there we have these G prime values of the elasticity. So to do something right now, what we have is the structural quantification basically from the images, but we are like looking into the correlation between this G prime and this pattern morphology, whether from there also if we can like distinguish these different morphologies and that. Yeah, we are on to it. Yeah. Thank you.
Nice talk.
Thank you.
So I was wondering that you are talking about the surface tension. So so for Laponite and oil, are you considering surface tension of like oil and water for that case, or you are...
No, yeah, so it's like something like water and mineral oil interfacial tension. So we didn't have the like the exact values.
Laponite.
Yeah, so but this is something which is right now going on. So in collaboration with Professor Sriram from IIT Madras. So he has this tensiometer, and we are doing those measurements to actually measure the interfacial tension between the suspension and the oil. So right now it's just kind of like it's a kind of binary thing, like whether it's present or not. So in that case, but the exact value of the interfacial tension we don't know right now. But yeah, we are like doing those measurements to get the exact value.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So when you have this viscoelastic fluid, I know you show the rheology, but I presume there are local inhomogeneities in the viscoelastic parameters and all this.
Local inhomogeneity.
So the rheologically measured values are average. Locally, there might be fluctuations.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So do you think that the injected fluid picks out these easy directions where the local viscoelasticity is kind of compromised?
Yeah, actually, so if I understood it correctly, so if you're talking about the local, so when it's going, so the feature like the dendritic patterns which we have observed is actually because of the shear thinning of the Laponite suspension. So this is basically at the tip you have the velocity will be less because of the shear thinning of the Laponite suspension. But this large driving pressure will try to broaden the tip. So one thing is trying to narrowing the fingertip, and the other force is trying to widen it up. That's why instead of tip splitting, we are observing this side shredding, and that's why we are like getting this dendritic pattern. But shear thinning will always be there for all the aging time. What we think like this, the possible explanation for that, at high ages, shear thinning will be there, but the elastic energy is so large, like it is sufficient enough to overcome the fracture energy, and that's why it's not like no side shredding, it's actually fracturing the medium. But yeah, so this the local deformation is actually giving these kind of features like the characteristics which we have observed. Yeah. Thank you.